Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Sunny Go One Piece podcast. Happy New Year, and hope everyone had a great holiday season. And yeah, we are going to be starting another season. And on this episode, we're going to be diving into episodes 743 through 746, which will cover manga chapters 798 through 801. And yes, I will be covering 4 episodes, so this will be a longer episode, because I wanted to kind of finish off the Dressrosa arc without having one episode just kind of be stuck on its own. So yeah, I basically crunched all 4 of the remaining Dressrosa arc episodes. And so yeah, it is now time for the Dressrosa arc to finally end as we say farewell to Dressrosa in epic and heartfelt fashion. Alright, so synopsis. When Fujitora and the Marines bearing down on the pirates, they all need to figure out how to escape while Law confronts Sengoku about his father figure, Corazon. In the midst of their escape, all the Colosseum Warriors band together and express their interest in following Luffy and the Straw Hats to create the Straw Hat Grand Fleet. So yeah, exciting stuff. The differences, there are quite a few smaller differences, but here are the bigger ones that I came up with. So the fight between Luffy and Fujitora is extended a bit before Fujitora catches on and comments on how Luffy is kind of taking it easy on him. Another change is there are a lot of filler reaction shots of people all over the island when Fujitora begins to move his debris cloud over the pirates. At the beginning of episode 745, there's a filler scene of the pirates that were scared, or not scared, screwed over with the fall of Doflamingo and are now pissed at Luffy. This shot was never in the manga. However, they do come back later on when the Straw Hat Grand Fleet and the Straw Hats are partying, are getting ready to party, and they all attack. And this is the people that Fujitora ends up dumping all the debris on top of. So this kind of predates that, and so it sets up that scene. Another change is during the banquet, there's a montage of the entire arc set to Hard Knock Days. That, of course, wasn't in the manga. And then finally, at the beginning of episode 746, there's a moment where Robin talks to Law about how he's feeling now that Doflamingo has been defeated and that his goal was met. And then she asks him what he plans to do next, but he just kind of completely blows her off and ignores her. This obviously doesn't faze Robin, but it's kind of weird that this scene even exists because it was never in the manga, and it makes Law look like a complete asshole. So I don't know why they added this scene, but yeah, it's in there. Alright, so let's just get into the episodes themselves. So since I've been waiting to talk about this specific scene, we're just going to jump right into it with the continuation of the conversation between Law and Sengoku. Sengoku wanted to know what his surrogate son died for and whether it was worth it, especially having theorized that it was for a pirate, and now he finally gets his answer. Law is such an interesting character in terms of motivation because he's so far been entirely motivated by vengeance, and we don't entirely know what he actually wants or what his real dream is, or even if he has one. And there's a moment where Law even questions his own life and choices when he wonders if this is the life that Corazon sacrificed his life for. Was this the life that he wanted someone bearing the name of D to lead, implying that Law always had this sort of nagging thought in the back of his mind that maybe Corazon saved Law because of what he could be capable of doing as a D clan member and not as someone that he just cared for and wanted to help. And that maybe Corazon saved, Law for ulterior motives outside of just wanting to save him. And you kind of begin to understand why Law is so closed off and very difficult to trust people, because even the person he loved the most maybe might not have even loved him at all and only saved him because he possessed some kind of ability to fight Doflamingo and the Celestial Dragons. Law has just revealed to Sengoku that he, like Luffy, is a D-clan member, which surprises Sengoku a bit. And Law insinuates that Sengoku, as a former fleet admiral, knows something more about the D-clan than anybody else, and given his reaction to Law, I'd say he does. But this made the plot hole of why the world government never went after Luffy harder in the beginning of the series more baffling if everyone knew just how dangerous the D name is. But maybe what they knew wasn't so much as a cause for alarm, but something to watch out for, and so maybe they didn't feel the need to go after the D-clan members as much, given that they hadn't really caused that much issue in the last 20-some plus years since Roger passed away, or I guess died and executed. Sengoku just plays dumb, but before leaving, he leaves Law with probably one of my absolute favorite quotes from the series that has stuck with me ever since I heard it. He reassures Law that Rocinante did not know the real reason for the significance of the D name, just as Sengoku does. So he didn't save Law for that purpose. Then Sengoku hits Law with the quote, "Don't try to find reason for somebody's love," or "uketa ai ni ryu nado tsukeru na." This one quote and moment, I think, changes Law in a massive way for the rest of the series. Law, until now, has shown that he doesn't trust people very easily and is always questioning people's motives. Even Luffy, someone who literally says out loud what he wants and what he's thinking all the time, he's constantly doubting everyone he meets because he's had to survive on his own for so long. And the one person he could trust, he even had doubts about them too. Law is constantly trying to find reasons or ulterior motives in anyone who wants to care for him or help him. It's from here, I believe, he really starts to kind of warm up to the idea that there really are genuinely good people that want to help. And you even see him start to see that he was already questioning this kind of line of thought throughout the fight with Doflamingo and Luffy, as well as Cavendish, both risking, their lives to help him for no other purpose than because they wanted to. And for me, in real life, this quote goes even beyond just received love. It's about how you perceive the world. If you're constantly trying to look for the worst in people and putting some sort of reason or ulterior motive for why people are doing things for you, then you're going to lead a very hollow and sad life. Never being able to trust anyone, always looking for the worst in people, you will most likely find the worst in people. And you don't have to be like Luffy, who, immediately trusts everyone, but allowing yourself to see the good in people will allow yourself to, in turn, want to help people too. And I think this is a hugely important lesson for Law to learn, because as we saw as a kid, Law wanted to follow in his father's footsteps and become a doctor, a job designed to care for people. And deep down, he is a good person, as we've seen hints of that throughout his appearances, like how he helps the kids on Punk Hazard, as well as how he just randomly shows up to save Luffy, although that may also have been because of the D name. But at the same time, Law still put his life and his crew at risk, going to Marineford just to save Luffy. And my theory is that by the end of the series, Law will ultimately make the sacrifice with his life, using the Ope Ope fruit ability to give Luffy back, some of his life somewhere near the end of the series, or perhaps give Luffy back the lifespan that he's chiseled away so far by pushing himself so far and so much. But anyways, to cap this scene off, I love this little moment that the two share about how if Sengoku was still in active duty, he would throw him in prison so that they could talk more. But since, ironically, Law, a pirate, is the only other person he can freely talk about Rocinante, they kind of have that shared memory. And Sengoku then echoes a message that has been repeated throughout the series, that what's important is to remember him and keep his memory alive. As long as he does that, then he should just live his life as he sees fit. And that's what Rocinante would have wanted too. And this sentiment of people not dying unless they're forgotten is one that Dr. Hiruluk so famously shouted from the mountaintops of the Drum Rockies. And it's such a perfect callback here. This finally gives Law the peace of mind to finally be free of his past and finally start living for the future that his parents and Koro-san wanted for him. And I, for one, was super excited to see what becomes of Law going forward, because he can go in so many directions and he's such a cool character. And this scene will forever be etched into my memory. I love this scene so much. And sometimes I just bring up YouTube just to watch this scene over again every so often without any sort of context or prompting. Sometimes I just really want to see this scene because there's something really beautiful that was so well done about this scene. And that quote, it hits so hard because it hits you in a way that can really hit you in real life. But with that beautiful scene done, we have to get back to the chaos of trying to escape Fujitora. And he is not playing around now, that fate has decided what his actions should be, but lifting every piece of debris into the sky to lay waste to all the pirates, dumbfounding everyone on the island at what they're seeing, with the sky literally blacked out by pieces of floating rocks and debris. And this is probably one of the most impressive displays of power that Fujitora has exhibited, aside from calling down a meteor earlier on Greenbit. Luckily, Law and Luffy return, as they all now have to get the heck out of there. However, instead of running like in the past versus the three admirals, like in Long Rain Longland versus Aokiji, in Sabodi versus Kizaru, and Marineford versus Akainu, Luffy finally has the strength and resolve to stand up to a Marine Admiral, which is such an incredible development in his character because each time he's faced a Marine and he ran, he faced extreme loss. He almost got him and Robin killed versus Aokiji, the entire crew was dismantled by Kizaru, and he lost his brother to Akainu. And he wasn't going to let that happen anymore and boldly declare that he'll never become the Pirate King if he can't beat a Marine Admiral. And man, was this moment so cool. It's so cathartic seeing Luffy finally strong enough to go toe-to-toe with a Marine Admiral. And to which all the remaining Straw Hats are in agreement and in support, even Usopp, which was kind of surprising. Which even catches Bartolomeo off guard, showing that even Usopp is starting to really grow into that status that the Straw Hat Pirates are not to be messed around with, and they can clearly beat the Shichibukai, and now they have their sights set on a Yonko. However, one detail that may not be as apparent in the anime is that Luffy is far from fully rested from his injuries versus Doflamingo. In the manga, it's really obvious that ever since leaving Kuros' house, he has been seen breathing very heavily with panting and wheezing sounds accompanying almost every speech bubble and that he's talking in, especially when he's carrying around Rebecca. So this is going to be a very difficult fight. But while this fight is amazing on the surface, one thing that was strange to anyone reading or watching this, and even Zoro comments on it, and eventually Fujitora also calls out Luffy, is that Luffy has not only been calling out his moves, announcing them, and not just like he's usually like saying the names out, he's calling out where and how he's going to attack, making sure that the blind admiral can adequately defend himself as if he's going easy on him. Fujitora, seeing this as an insult to his strength and position as a Marine Admiral, gets kind of angry at Luffy for showing sympathy for a blind man. But Luffy, being an honest and sincere guy, comes out and just tells him that he can't bring himself to attack a blind man without some sort of warning, because in his words, he doesn't hate him, which amuses Fujitora a great deal, but also puts him in an incredibly awkward position given his standing. And this exchange between the two is hugely important in understanding what the difference in operating like a pirate and operating like a Marine or world government agent in terms of what doing the right thing is. And what I mean by this is that, first, it states that, what will that act of mercy gain you? I'm disappointed. How can you act so illogically, is what Fujitora says. And he goes on to say, when a man fights, he has a standing to uphold that leaves no room for honesty or honest sympathy and likes and dislikes. And while this is said in the manga, in the anime, Luffy just says, "Shut up, I don't care." And Fujitora then says, "Are you really that big of a fool? I'm trying my utmost to hold up my standing." And this exchange pretty much encapsulates everything wrong with the Marines and what frustrated Smoker and Tashigi so much at Arabasta and Fujitora while he was in Dressrosa. Despite knowing the right thing to do and wanting to help people, they often can't do as they want because of the rigid, often corrupt rules of an organization ruled by bureaucracy. Whereas the pirate, in its purest definition, according to the likes of Luffy and Roger, is the freest person in the world, therefore can do whatever he pleases, and they can do what they feel is right and align themselves with whoever they want, even if it's their enemy, which is exactly what saved Dressrosa. All these different people, some who were even enemies or rivals at one point, coming together is what saved the day. And this is how ultimately the Marines as an organization needs to change, and what Kobe and Helmeppo, as well as with the help of people like Tashigi and Smoker, and maybe even Isho as well, as many others, will eventually need to change about the Marines by the end of the series if they want to do the right thing. They're too rigid in terms of good versus bad, pirates versus Marines. It doesn't allow flexibility to adapt to the situation as necessary to do what's right and to do what's best for everyone involved. Luffy then gets blasted back with Fujitora's raging tiger attack that knocks a massive hole into the stone wall behind them, but Hiruden grabs Luffy and doesn't let him back into the fight so that they can finally escape. But Fujitora is not about to let that happen by sending the massive cluster of debris he's left suspended in the air towards the East Port. And this is probably one of the most intimidating attacks ever in the series. Like, this is insane. If Fujitora was actually trying here, how do they even fight this? And thankfully, he's not actually trying. Fujitora, as he's sending the debris cluster towards them, has a little monologue to himself how there is an inescapable hell waiting for them, whether it's the debris or even if they manage to escape, it will be the wrath of the Yonko emperors. And here we get some important insight into Issho and the way he views the world, which is one of the most despair viewpoint ever. We learn that he intentionally blinded himself due to all the horrors that he's witnessed in the world, and he didn't want to see any more of it. And it really makes you wonder what Issho's life was like before and what happened to him that was so horrific that it made him want to blind himself. And I hope Oda does at some point dive deeper into this backstory, because I am extremely fascinated what he saw that was so horrifying that made him want to just gouge his eyes out and just put slashes across his face. To me, that says that here's a man that has been so disillusioned and lost hope for the world that he didn't think there would be anything left worth seeing, because he would only see more horror. And it looks like he still wants to be a service to people with his humane justice. He just thinks that ultimately there's just too much evil in the world and there is no outrunning it. Until something magical happens. And this moment is yet another incredible moment in the series that I will also never forget and is one of my all-time favorites. And just as Fujitora is just getting ready to unleash the debris cloud, a bunch of Dressrosa citizens still running towards the east dock and chasing after Luffy, shouting that they won't forgive Luffy for kidnapping Rebecca, preventing Fujitora from attacking. But we learn that this whole time, everyone knew what was happening and were never actually angry about Luffy taking Rebecca. They're all seen yelling and chasing, but they're chasing Luffy with smiles. And Fujitora, with his observation haki, can read people's souls and sense no trace of anger or resentment. And I tear up every time I see this moment. It's so damn beautiful. This was all a calculated method for them to repay Luffy and the Straw Hats for saving their country. This is then capped off by one of my all-time favorite moments when Issho has a fundamental change of heart and he begins to wonder what kind of person Luffy is, what he looks like, what color his hair is, what shape his eyes are, what his face looks like, and in stark contrast to what he just said in the scene prior, he wishes for the first time in his life since that moment that he hadn't blinded himself, with the biggest smile saying, "I bet you look kind," realizing that there is still something beautiful and hopeful to still see in the world. And I just think this moment is so amazingly well done, and why Fujitora, aka Issho, is my favorite admiral, and maybe one of my favorite characters in the series, because he sees despite his blindness, he sees things for what they are. He doesn't really use his preconceived notions to determine whether a pirate is good or bad, whether people are good or bad, and whether the Marines are good or bad. He just sees them for what they are and changes depending on the information that he has. And I can't wait to see what he will go on to do now that he's got this sort of renewed sense of purpose and hope because of his fondness for Luffy. And I think the admirals are going to be really interesting, all of them. I know by this point in the series, we haven't met Ryokugyu yet, but yeah, all 5 of the Marine admirals are going to be very interesting. And you can even throw in Sengoku and even like Garp and Tsuru in there as well. They're not necessarily admirals. I guess Sengoku is, but what their role is for the remainder of the series is going to be very interesting, because I have a hard time seeing them all being antagonists. Akainu or Sakazuki, maybe. And, I won't really speak on Ryokugyu because you haven't met him yet, but I do have my thoughts on him as well. But yeah, we'll talk about that once we get more information and get further into the series. But because of the help from the Dressrosa citizens, they reach Hirudin's ship, and which mesmerizes Usopp and Luffy, who have a ton of admiration for the Elbaf giants. And we learned that Hirudin has formed a small crew of giant mercenaries to rebuild the giant pirates. But he says something interesting in that he wants to unite all the giant tribes, meaning that he wants to get giants outside of the Elbaf island as well. And we know that there are other giant tribes outside of Elbaf, as Saul mentioned that he is not from Elbaf, and he didn't like being lumped in with the quote-unquote barbaric Elbaf giants. So we know that there are other giant tribes or clans or groups of people out there, and they don't necessarily all like each other. And so it seems like Hyrule has a goal or a dream to unite all of them. And we all figured that this would somehow be addressed whenever they get to Elbaf and the Elbaf arc takes place, which, interestingly enough, is happening right now in the real world. The rest of the warriors talk about how they're pairing off with the others that don't already belong to crews. And one interesting and cool detail is that Ideo and Blue Gilly teaming up. And that's significant because Ideo is a long-arm tribesman and Blue Gilly is a long-leg tribesman. And as we saw in Brooke's time skip during the 2-year time skip, these two groups of people do not like each other. So it's awesome to see how much they've grown to like and respect each other to the point that they actually want to join together in a crew. And not only that, something amazing is about to be unveiled. And I honestly was not expecting this. And this floored me when this happened. But Luffy is confused why they're all talking as if they're joining Luffy. And it's shockingly revealed that they all want to join the Straw Hats as follower crews, all 5,600 of them combined. And also notice Luffy's Grand Fleet is going to consist of 5,600 members. As you know, 5-6 is Luffy's number referencing Gomu, because as you can say, Go and 6, or 5 is Go and 6 is Mu. So you get Gomu. So there's 5,600 of them, which is kind of cool. And I kid you not, when I read this part for the first time in the manga, I just about jumped up and screamed, "What? No way!" You know how this whole time I kept mentioning how I thought that a lot of these guys would be really cool if any one of them joined the crew, because they all seemed like they could easily fit right in. But not only do I get that hope, and I understand why Oda made us like these guys so much, and it was so perfect. Luffy is about to have a grand fleet of subordinate ships like Whitebeard did in Marineford. And he's going to be one more step closer to becoming an Emperor-level pirate to kind of rival Big Mom, Kaido, Shanks, Blackbeard. He's going to now have the military might that the other emperors no doubt have. And this is such an amazing development. Like, I still love this moment. Except, when it comes time to exchange the vows with Sake, Luffy refuses, which makes a lot of sense as Luffy says it's too stuffy being the captain of a grand fleet. This scene is so amazing because each of the Straw Hats already knew the answer Luffy was going to give, and it completely becomes a Straw Hat nonsense conversation where Zoro becomes obsessed with wanting to drink the sake before they even get to have the oath. And then it just follows with everyone else kind of behind him wanting to also drink the sake as well. And when he yells that he wants to become the Pirate King, not someone important, it genuinely confuses everyone. And I especially love Law's no-nonsense reaction of, "What the hell are you talking about?" Because how can you become the Pirate King and not be someone important? But when you think about what becoming the Pirate King means for Luffy specifically, it makes perfect sense because, ironically, he's not trying to become the Pirate King for the reasons everyone else is trying to, which is those famous first words said in the series, which is wealth, fame, and power. Luffy wants none of that. For him, it's all about the adventure and being the freest person, and by being tied down to taking care of a grand fleet of 5,600 people is just too restrictive for him. But after that explanation, the others all begin to understand what Luffy means, and I freaking love how they all respect and love Luffy even more, which makes them even more worthy of following under Luffy and the Straw Hat banner. But inversely, they all take after their Grand Captain's philosophy to heart, and they do whatever they want to do and freely take the oaths amongst themselves without even Luffy's approval. And the 7 captains, Hyrule, Sai, Ideo, Leo, Cavendish, and Bartolomeo, all take the oath to devote their lives and souls to Luffy and the Straw Hat Pirates, birthing the Straw Hat Grand Fleet. And I can't tell you how immensely hyped I was for this moment. This made it genuinely feel like this is getting real. Luffy is well on his way to becoming the Pirate King. And that moment where the 7 of them all drink their sake in the manga, this is one of the rare occasions where Oda actually utilizes a full 2-page spread. And this will be the last one until the very recently, just until I think last year or the year before, where we finally got another true to full page spread, like about 10 years later. And so that kind of tells you how momentous this moment was for the series. This was a huge deal. And because I was not expecting it, as well as the whole arc when I was reading it, I was hoping for one of them to join, but instead Oda blew me away by coming up with a way to make this happen with all of them without messing with the main crew dynamic. And it was so clear why most of the second half of the arc you felt that way I did about these characters, because Oda was specifically priming us with writing these characters in a way where we would actually want them and like them enough to join the crew. And while all this is unfolding on the ships, Isho is now barely even hiding that he is a huge supporter and fan of Luffy. The remnants of the criminals and pirates that were loyal to Doflamingo, who were screwed over by his collapse, take to the seas to get revenge on Luffy, but Isho just happens to drop the debris he's had floating above all this time on just these enemy ships, completely avoiding the Straw Hat Grand Fleet ships, and he even thanks them for everything they did to help him and Dressrosa, which is wild to see an admiral like Luffy this much to the point where he's bowing and thanking him. Kuzan seemed like he was a fan of Luffy, but at the time, that seemed more out of admiration for his grandfather Garp, who was a mentor to him. But amusingly and very heartwarmingly, Isho isn't alone. Sengoku is also secretly approves of this, as he's seen jokingly saying, "I heard that," while grinning. Everything about this ending is so perfect and I love it so much. It's such a heartwarming moment and shows us that there is hope for the Marines with the right people in charge. Sengoku wasn't able to make that change happen, but he was still able to somewhat keep it in check, it seems like. At least I'd like to think so. One little thing is how Sengoku was able to sneak up on Isho. I know this is done for a gag and not to be taken too seriously, but Sengoku's ability to sneak up on someone who has that much mastery over observation haki to the point where Isho can read people's hearts could say a lot in terms of Sengoku's ability and why he's stood above the admirals for so long. And just a thought that crossed my mind when I rewatched this moment. But again, I wouldn't take this scene too seriously, as it was mostly played for gags, because Isho didn't even catch on to Uho, who was the gorilla that's also with Sengoku. He should have been able to sense him as well. And yeah, it's not like we know the gorilla is able to erase his presence in any way. And with all the obstacles out of the way, we finally get our traditional victory celebration banquet with everyone that feels even grander than any in the past, with this many new friends and such a droolingly long arc, especially in the anime, capped off with a really sweet moment where Rebecca and Kuros can finally share a moment as father and daughter. Rebecca asking him whether they think they will be able to see them again, and the answer is of course yes. There will most definitely come a time when they will need the help of Dressrosa, just like Arabasta, and all the other places that the Straw Hats have helped will come to their aid by the end of the series. I have no doubts about this. And once the Straw Hats all have set sail and are in the midst of their celebration, we cut back to Dressrosa, and two incredibly unexpected but familiar voices are heard talking to each other about the missing weapons, as well as the trafficking list, which were taken by Koala and the Revolutionary Army. And the two voices that can be heard are none other than Kaku and Lucci, formerly of CP9, but have now somehow been promoted to CP Aegis 0, along with Spandam, who is now seemingly taking orders from Lucci. Now, in the manga, it wasn't really as explicit that this was Kaku who Lucci was talking to, but we all kind of basically suspected it. But in the anime, it makes it pretty obvious because we can hear Kaku's voice, and the silhouette is a lot more definitive than it was in the manga. Now, many of you who are anime-only watchers might be wondering how this happened, and honestly, even as a manga reader, I was thoroughly confused by this at the time, and for a long time actually, because this entire story wasn't revealed to us until fairly recently in the SBS answer from volume 109, which as of the time of this recording was only about a year and a half ago, in July of 2024, and this chapter 801 was released in 2015. So we had to wait almost a decade to understand this. And I'll go ahead and explain it here since we do have the full story and you're never going to get it through just watching the anime or reading the manga. And there's not really any particular spoilers for any other events that are yet to come. So after CP9's defeat at NES Lobby, we went through the whole CP9's independent report cover story, which for more on that, you can go back and listen to my podcast, episode 157, where I go into detail the events of that cover story. But after that cover story, the former CP9 agents all trained to get stronger during the 2-year time skip while Spandam recovers from his back injuries at the hands of Robin, and thanks to Spandine, his father's influence, is awarded a high-ranking position in CP0. Now, Spandine would eventually team up with Lucci and the former CP9 agents to uncover a criminal conspiracy by underworld bigwigs and former Level 6 prisoners that escaped as a result of Luffy's breakout of Impel Down during Marineford, and destroy the organization to stop it. And due to their help with that incident, Lucci and the others were reinstated to the intelligence services of CP0. Spandine later fell sick and lost much of his influence, causing Spandam to be demoted to Lucci's underling now. And one other note is that during Punk Hazard, we do get a brief tease that Lucci is still involved with the story and gearing up for a potential return. So during the broker scene in Punk Hazard, where Caesar is demonstrating the slime capabilities, one of the potential buyers is a very silhouetted Lucci. In fact, it was so silhouetted that even Toei Animation didn't realize it, and the anime actually just threw in some random mustachioed guy in his place with a top hat, which is hilarious considering. But yeah, that guy is actually Lucci. This was really interesting because this will be the first time a villain will return, and they are still going to be an antagonist, or at least potentially. So far, all the returning villains have returned to ally with Luffy, although technically you could say Buggy returning in Logtown to execute Luffy would be the first time, but he eventually allied with Luffy, so that's a half point, I guess. And also, Buggy wasn't that much of a threat at the time. So the prospect of a rematch against Lucci with a powered-up Luffy was going to be a very fun and something very cool to look forward to. And from here, we get some fun moments of Dressrosa recovering from the destruction. And the standout moment is, of course, that they moved Kuros' statue out into the main square and added 2 new ones beside it with Lucy and God Usopp statues, complete with the ridiculous face that saved the entire kingdom. And I love how in the universe, this is what Usopp's face actually looked like to the people. Like, this wasn't a gag for us, the audience. His face contorted like that, and everyone actually could see it, which is just ridiculous, but also hysterical at the same time. King Riku also mentions that they need to start preparing for the reverie, the same one that was mentioned by Neptune, who was talking about them attending their first one in decades during the Fishman Island arc, so they will all be attending the same reverie. At the time, I thought it'd be interesting if Oda would show us this reverie, since this time around we would know so many more of the kings in attendance, between Cobra from Arabasta, Dalton from the Sakura Kingdom, Neptune from Ryugu Kingdom, Riku from Dressrosa, as well as Elisabello from the Prudence Kingdom, just to name a few. And also, there is another one that I don't know if it's really a spoiler, but I guess, yeah, it's not really a spoiler. Because we already know, if you've read the cover stories, then you already know it. But Wapol is also the king of his own kingdom as well. And so Wapol will also be there. So we know quite a few of the kings this time. So it'll be interesting to see what comes of this reverie. Now, after Dressrosa, we get a brief scene from the marine side of things that they have left in Dressrosa, and I love how we're finally really getting a sense of who Sengoku is as a person and where his sort of ethics and morality lie. He's still a man shrouded in mystery, but with these last few scenes compared to what we knew of him up till now is night and day. Even in this brief scene between him and Isho eating ramen aboard the ship shows why he was chosen to be the fleet admiral in the first place. He has a very level head and balanced approach to things. Clearly his morals align with the good side, I guess, which is why he wanted to, have Kuzan succeed him. But at the same time, he gives Sakazuki the benefit of the doubt and shows some sympathy for the position that Isho's actions has caused, while also not reprimanding or criticizing Isho about those actions. it kind of fits pretty well with the theme of his devil fruit too. Like if you remember, he possesses the Hito fruit model Daibutsu, also allows him to transform into a Buddha Daibutsu. And it may grant him some level of sort of enlightenment that allows him to approach things from this balanced mindset. Or it could be more of a thematic thing that Oda has attributed to Sengoku because of his association to the Buddhism through the fruit. We then see a scene with a chained up Doflamingo with Tsuru watching over him, and Doflamingo warns Tsuru that with him now out of the picture, there is no one to rein in the pirates. But coldly and badassly, Tsuru just calls him out and says that it just sounds like a loser whining. And you can see this kind of gets to Doflamingo because this is the only time where he kind of like winces and frowns. And I always wondered why Tsuru is such an intimidating figure in the eyes of Doflamingo. Even here, we see her words cut into him. And given that she is counted among the level of Garp and Sengoku, she is probably equally as strong as them, which is certainly a valid reason to be scared of her. But we've just never really seen her in action. I mean, her wash fruit doesn't necessarily instill a lot of fear or intimidation in and of itself. But Doflamingo then foreshadows a coming war between all the different factions vying for power and the One Piece. And meanwhile, setting up the events for the next arc, we get a tease of one of Kaido's captains, Jack, sailing to recover Caesar. In the manga, this was a little bit more obscured. But yeah, I mean, I guess because the anime kind of has the ability to see into the future, they could provide a little bit more clarity on this one. But the episode and the arc ends with more celebration from the Straw Hat Grand Fleet as we get to see the depths of Bartolomeo's fandom and obsession with the Straw Hats. And when I read this, I straight up could not catch my breath. This was so funny. First off, the Bardo Club ship is called the Going Luffy Senpai Go, of course being named after both Luffy and the Going Merigo. And it has this massive figurehead of Luffy on the bow, with Usopp even commenting that this was weird that this ship is more like Luffy, or this ship looks more like it would have Luffy than their actual ship. And other fun details about this ship is that the whole design seems to mimic the Sunny, but the main cabin at the top is Mary's head. And I love Zoro's offhanded comment about how it's got evil looking eyes because it does look really angry compared to the regular Sunny or the regular Mary. And then it has the tangerine trees planted at the rear deck like both the Mary and the Sunny does for Nami's remembrance of Bellemere. But then it also has Chopper's head and antlers for some reason on the stern of the ship. And so when you're looking at it from behind, Chopper's looking at you. When you're looking at it from the front, Luffy and Mary are staring at you, which is just a ridiculous design for a ship. And one thing I always wondered about Bartolomeo is how he knows this much detail about the Straw Hats. Like, he even knows about Bellemere. Where would this information have ever been published? And as far as I know, Oda has never revealed this, even in a joking way through the SBS or anything. So right now, we just have to kind of go off of the fact that this guy is a super fan like us and went through in-depth research, maybe even traveling all over to their specific islands to figure all this stuff out. So with that, the Grand Fleet go about their separate ways for now, but they all take a piece of Luffy's Vipera card that Sabo made. But the interesting thing is that Bellamy took a piece with him as well, even though he says that he won't join the Grand Fleet, which, good for him. Instead of immediately jumping back in to follow someone, it seems like he's going to go out on his own to figure out what he wants, and I like that. But he will for sure, again, come back at some point to help Luffy out. I have no doubt about this, just like Kuros and Rebecca and everyone else. Then, of course, this ends on the big reveals for the updated bounties of the Straw Hats. But before that, we get to see some hilarious autographs that the Straw Hats gave Bartolomeo. Now, in the manga, they're really tiny, but the anime gives us a very clear look, close-up of all of them, beginning with Luffy, and his literally just says, me, or he writes ore in hiragana. And this is funny because hiragana is the most basic of the Japanese alphabets, where like little school children start with it before learning katakana, or, which is the second set of alphabet in Japanese, or ultimately the most difficult one being kanji. Those are the sort of the complicated Chinese style characters. Now, one other aspect to this is that you don't really see in the anime, if you specifically read the manga in Japanese, is that Oda writes Luffy's dialogue in a way that shows this and will often use as little katakana and kanji as possible to emphasize Luffy's childlike and dim nature. You'll see him say words that would normally be written in kanji, but Oda will go out of his way to do Luffy's dialogue with just hiragana instead. Now, he still uses kanji and katakana for Luffy at sometimes, but you will notice, like, I guess if you read Japanese, you will notice that a lot of Luffy's dialogue is written purely with hiragana, or as much hiragana as possible, to kind of emphasize his childlike nature. Zoro's autograph is equally funny, because he just writes the kanji for katana or blade. And Usopp is a silhouette of his head with a proper signature. This is also funny since Chopper has an autograph from Usopp, but one from Sogeking already. So here we finally get to see what Usopp's actual autograph is. Frankie's is pretty standard. He just writes Frankie in English with his trademark star. Robin is interesting that she wrote her name in hiragana too, and I'm not entirely sure that what this is referring to, other than Oda maybe hasn't decided how he wants to write her name in Japanese. But it is curious because in the manga, you know, when you see her name and it's said by people, Oda usually writes Robin, Nico Robin, in katakana. So it's interesting that he has Robin write in hiragana. So yeah, I guess I don't know what that really means, other than, you know, Robin is just speaking Japanese. Anyways, the rooster drawing is hilarious, though. It's, of course, a reference to the fact that Robin has been referring to Bartolomeo as Niwatori-kun, or young rooster, or rooster-kun. So, yeah, I thought that was a really fun and cute detail. Now, moving on from the autographs to the main event of the updated bounties. So we start with Luffy, who has gone up from 400 million to 500 million berries. Zoro's bounty had a huge jump because he didn't have an increase since NES Lobby. He has gone from 120 million to 320 million, which is a massive jump. Next, we have Robin, who has gone up from 80 million to 130 million. Frankie moves up from 44 million to 94 million. And Frankie is upset that as he's the only one among the ones that stayed behind in Dressrosa to not have their bounties cross the 100 million mark. And on top of that, his image has now been replaced by the Frankie Shogun. With this will hilariously develop into an ongoing gag for the rest of the series. Kind of like how Chopper is always given a hilariously low bounty for being considered a pet. Usopp is hilarious too, as he finally gets his first bounty attached to his name, not Sogeking. His last bounty, which was associated with Sogeking, was at 30 million, but not only that, he is now known as God Usopp, not just Usopp, God Usopp, at 200 million berries. Also, this picture was taken during the moment Hiruden was holding him up down in the basement area, just after he defeated Sugar. Like, where was this? How was this picture taken during the moment? Like, who was available to take this picture? And Usopp has come a long way, especially how he's still terrified that people will come after him. But he's also happy and proud of his high bounty, which just shows that he does love being a pirate. He's got that pirate heart in him. Moving on to Sanji, he's got the most interesting bits to his new poster reveal, as he's got a new bounty going from 77 million to 177 million. But he's also got an actual picture of him instead of that, that crazy drawing rendition of him that looks like Duval. But it's of him with love-struck eyes. And I never bothered to look into when this photo was taken until I did research for this podcast episode. But after looking into it, I found the exact moment this photo was taken. It's a moment where he's got the love-struck eyes, but he also has to be shirtless as we see his whole arm. And the biggest clue is the fish floating above him in the upper left corner. That would place it in Fishman Island. And the only time he's with the mermaids, which happens towards the beginning, when he has this sort of bloody nose incident. And then at the end during the banquet, but during the banquet he's fully clothed, so this would then place it at the Mermaid Cafe. And sure enough, this exact moment can be found on the first page of chapter 609 from the Fishman Island arc, or in episode 528. But again, I have to ask, who took this picture and for what reason. So the answer that Oda has given us is that there is a character named Attach that is somehow always there to take bounty poster pictures, kind of like how Oda uses Minatomo to explain away inconsistencies with structures. And I love how Zoro comments that his last picture was funnier, and to the dismay of many Sanji fans, they're always sad that Sanji gets these ridiculously joke posters. Kind of like how now Frankie has this sort of sunny and Chopper has the low bounty. Sanji also gets like a gag with his bounty posters always being ridiculous. And yeah, he's got all these like incredibly unflattering pictures. However, the most curious thing about Sanji's poster is that unlike every other poster we've ever seen in the series thus far, Sanji's poster mentions only alive, not dead or alive. This means that someone in the world government deems Sanji special in some way that wants him enough to be brought in alive at all costs. At the time, this fueled the flames of all the theories that Sanji was some kind of royalty. And now that his picture was real, there was some royal family that paid the world government to have Sanji's poster be only alive. And this has been a long-held theory since Arabasta, ever since Sanji referred to himself as Mr. Prince. Unfortunately, that's all we have to go on at the moment, and we will have to wait until Oda decides to reveal more to us about this thing. Now, to cap it off, Nami and Brook, just by association with the Strong Hats, had their bounties increased by 50 million each, while poor Chopper did get an increase, but only went up from 50 to 100 berries. And yeah, poor guy, he's just never going to get a real bounty. Now, in closing, the final shot of this episode teases the filler arc that follows this, but this finally marks the end of the Dressrosa arc. And what an arc full of ups and downs and some incredible developments for the story. Now, before we move on to the filler arc and eventually back to the canon Zou arc, I'll take a few episodes to do a review of the Dressrosa arc as a whole, like I've done for every other arc. But we also have not one, but two cover stories to go over, so look forward to that over the next couple episodes. But anyways, if you did enjoy this, send me a like or comment, and if you want to join me on this journey of rewatching One Piece, please consider subscribing. Check out my Instagram at SunnyGoPodcast for updates when I post new episodes, as well as to check out my manga collection. And as always, I wanted to thank you for taking the time out to listen to my podcast, just this tiny spoiler section. But if you're not interested in that, stay safe out there, and I hope to see you on the next episode. Bye! All right, so spoiler section. I know this is a long episode, so I'm going to keep this short. There's just kind of two things that I kind of wanted to mention. They really don't have much bearing on anything, but... So the first is one thing I noticed that I hadn't really noticed until I watched this rewatch. My goodness, I am having a hard time talking now. Is how the camera pans over the Sakazuki cups that the Grand Fleet members use to make their oath sitting on the deck is kind of the same camera panning motion as the moment just before they all do the raid on Onigashima during the Wano arc, and that epic moment where they were all about to have their celebration with Jinbei, but Luffy then decided not to do it and wait for everyone to be able to join, along with the samurai and the minks and everybody, and they all slam their drinks down without drinking it, and the camera pans to the undrunken cups very similarly. It's not the exact same angle, but the feel is very familiar and very similar. And I feel like that was almost an intentional callback that the anime did for themselves, because both moments were not in the manga, and obviously Oda can't do the camera pans in the manga. But I thought that was a really cool detail. I don't know. It just seemed... I don't know if it's like it was intentional or not, but that camera pan, it does look very similar. So I thought that was a really cool detail, whether it was intentional or not. Another thing I wanted to mention is, so when Doflamingo is going on in his monologue about who will be the one to take the empty seat at the top. At the time, it obviously sounds like he's talking about the One Piece, like who's going to get the One Piece. But I wonder if he's talking now that he's talking about the empty throne. And since it seems like he knows about Imu and the empty throne, by this point, at least in where we are in the current story, it's pretty clear that Doflamingo knows about Imu, and even the national treasure that he's talking about in his flashback we believe he was talking about Emu as well, that thing that the world government is keeping hidden. And so, yeah, in retrospect, watching this monologue, I think it's pretty clear that he's actually talking about the empty throne. And he's talking about Emu, like who's going to take him down? Is Emu going to remain in that seat, or is someone else going to be the one who takes Emu down and claims that empty throne? So yeah, I thought those were two very interesting things kind of to look at in retrospect, knowing more about the story. But anyways, yeah, those are the only two things I kind of wanted to mention as spoilers. But yeah, thanks for listening, and I hope to see you on the next episode. See ya!